We are at Cold War divides the world. I've hinted at this a few times. Oops. Thank you. Already, right? We've explained how fundamentally the Cold War is about a conflict between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. It's a rivalry, a competition to see which one of those two superpowers will be the dominant force in the world, which one will have the most influence, which ideology will have the most influence, capitalism and democracy or communism. So that's the grand, big picture conflict that is the Cold War. But it really involves the whole world, okay, that gets sort of pulled into the Cold War. We see these proxy wars, remember that term I used yesterday, fought in Korea, in Vietnam. We're going to look at a situation in Cuba in your reading tonight. So it's really the whole world is divided. Hang on a second. Okay, so the whole world really is kind of becomes divided into these two camps. Everybody takes sides, maybe not because they want to, but because the two superpowers want them to. They're each competing for control of the globe. So you get this Cold War division, this first world, third world divide that develops during the Cold War. So let's look at each of those and what that means. So these phrases are used still today. Even though the Cold War is over, these are kind of concepts that still are kicked around from time to time. So you've got first world, a second world, and a third world. So the first world represents, simply, the United States and its allies. The United States and its allies. That's what the first world means. So I guess if we're looking at this map up here, it's the blue. I mean, technically what this map is showing you can't quite see the key here, but this is depicting NATO and countries that are friends with NATO. But that basically means the United States and its allies. So you got the United States, Canada, NATO, Western Europe, and some countries, some other countries all around the world. Okay, so this is what you might call first world, what they did call first world. So second world then in this setup is the Soviet Union and its allies. First world, the United States and its allies. Second world, the Soviet Union and its allies. So first world is capitalist, right? Industrialized, modern, democratic. Those are the ideas in the first world. Second world, because it's the Soviet Union and its allies, it's communist. So then this other term emerges called the third world. So third world countries, this comes to is a phrase that's used to describe developing countries, independent countries, non-aligned. You going somewhere? What just happened? Hi, David. Third world. Okay. So the third world countries are sometimes called non-aligned. Non-aligned. Neither first nor second. Not on Team USA, not on Team USSR. Non-aligned. Neither side. So these non-aligned third world countries are usually what are described as developing countries. That means they're economically developing. That means they're typically sort of behind the advanced countries of the first world. They're poorer, less industrialized, right? They're not as advanced economically. These third world, that's what the term sort of means today. You may have heard it before. Describing a country as a third world country has a slightly negative connotation. It's almost like a criticism. You're saying something about that country. What's that? Today, I mean, a lot of the countries of Central America, a lot of the countries of Africa, right, that are not as advanced economically, poorer. A lot of times they're unstable politically, where the political leadership changes all the time. A lot of times these are countries that have violence. Venezuela would be more communist, right? Although, so remember, this setup of First World, Second World, Third World is a Cold War thing, and the Cold War ends in 1989. Venezuela, in some ways, fits the description of a third world country, but if we're using these terms, it'd be more of a second world. So, third world countries developing, economically developing, independent, that is non-aligned on neither side, oftentimes located in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. This is the third world. You've got first world, second world, and everybody else in a sense, right? The rest, so to speak. So during the Cold War strategies here on your outline. Next item. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union were both trying to win over third world countries, right? Each side, U.S. and USSR, wants to have these third world countries be on their side. Wants to win them over. Make them allies. Make them join one side or the other. That's part of how the Cold War unfolded. Part of how the conflict or the competition unfolded. To see which of these two could be the most influential. Which of these two could win over the most non-aligned countries to their side. And thereby be the most powerful nation on earth. So they would use various methods to try to win over third world countries. Both the U.S. and the USSR would do things like provide material support for wars of revolution, provide guns for one side or the other in, say, a civil war. Actually, we've seen that, haven't we? That exact thing. We saw the United States do that, right? They did it in Korea. They went and provided military aid to South Korea so that they could defeat their fellow North Koreans in that war. That's our way of winning them over. Vietnam, same kind of thing. When we get to Cuba tonight and tomorrow, we'll see the same thing. In Cuba, it's the Soviet Union providing the Cubans with weapons to win them over to their side. So this is one of the basic things that happens in the Cold War. Right, you help one side or the other win the Civil War, and then since you help them, they're your buddies, basically, if they win the war. All right, so that's one way that they win over third world countries. Another major area of activity in the Cold War involves the CIA and the KGB. The CIA, which stands for the Central Intelligence Agency. This is the American spy agency. I'm actually going to bring this down so I can fit these on here. The CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. This is in America, this is our spy agency. The CIA spies. Do you know what it means to spy? Fancy pants word for spying is espionage. Espionage. They engage in espionage. They try to steal information from other countries. Now, the thing that's interesting about spying is that countries spy on their enemies, obviously, but they also spy on their friends. Because friends don't always tell each other everything. I guess we can compare that to real human friends. I mean, you can have somebody who you love and trust and is really your friend, and they still don't tell you everything. There might be stuff you might want to know that they don't tell you. That might be useful to you. So spying is a huge part of the Cold War. Both sides do it. America does it. The Soviets do it. We'll talk about the Soviets in a second here. But for America, it's the CIA. They go and they do things like plant microphones in buildings, right? You know what double agents are? They have people who work for... They'll have someone who works in the Soviet government who's actually stealing information from like the file cabinets in the Soviet government and taking pictures and like secretly sending that information back to the United States. A mole is another word for it. Double agents, spies, they're all the same thing, right? So the United States has lots of spies in the Soviet Union. They want to know what the Soviet Union's up to. Like, how big is your military? What kind of nuclear weapons do you have? Where are your missiles located? What kind of plans do you have for whatever, right? Just you want to get information on their enemy so you can find out what they're doing. The Soviets are doing the same thing. Their agency is called the KGB. The KGB. Famous Soviet spy agency. What does the KGB stand for? Roll up your sleeves and get ready to write down a bunch of letters. Russian. I don't know Russian, but this is what it stands for. I looked it up. K. G. Yeah, write it down. B. Relax, everyone. You'll be okay. I promise. It's going to be fine. There we go. How about that? Well, we have long words. It just looks weird to you because you don't know the language. Do you realize that English is the weirdest language in the world? Have you ever heard that? It is. How it sounds, but also the rules of grammar are complicated, and they're inconsistent. So it's really difficult for people to try to learn English because it doesn't make any damn sense. So English, Mandarin, Spanish, Mandarin Chinese. So those are some of the biggest. French for a lot of years was one of the languages of the world. Okay, so KGB. I'm not even going to try to say it. Komitet Gosvarstvenoy Bezopasnosti. Something like that. I totally made that up, that pronunciation. It's the same thing as the CIA in the sense that it's their spy agency. Now, to be completely fair, it's not exactly the same as the KGB, as the CIA, because the KGB does stuff like torture and murder people. CIA does some of that, but not nearly as much. Okay. So, both sides spy. They steal each other's nuclear secrets. Part of the reason why the Soviets were able to build nuclear weapons so quickly after 1945, right? You know, the Americans were first to do it. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, fat man and little boy. The Soviets got nuclear weapons too fairly quickly, in part due to the fact that they stole, through espionage, the plans, right? The secrets, because this is really high-end, high-tech, hard science stuff. It's not easy to do. So all the secret techniques and scientific knowledge that went into America building its bomb were actually stolen by Soviet spies, taken back to Russia and used to help them build their own bombs. So, major part of the Cold War. Last Cold War strategy that I want to mention here is aid. Various forms of aid. Help, assistance. So both the United States and the Soviet Union provide monetary, financial aid or assistance to third world countries to help them out. Providing money for the military, we talked about that, so they can build up their militaries. Providing money for stuff like building schools. And to simply, because remember we said third world countries are, by definition, underdeveloped. Right? They tend to be somewhat backward economically. They could use some assistance in growing their economies and modernizing and joining the first world or the second world. So the Soviet Union and the United States provides aid to those countries in the hopes that they will then be friends with the United States. It's very similar to what you saw with the Marshall Plan. We talked about the Marshall Plan, right? I think we did. Where the United States provides aid to European countries. Yeah.
This is a weird comparison. But you know how they're basically assisting them. So it's like Section 8.
Not exactly, but also not exactly not, because people come to rely on various forms of welfare, like Section 8, because that's what Section 8 is. It's welfare. It's government aid for housing. Tend to oftentimes end up loyal to the federal government that gave them the aid, right? I don't know if you know, but this is something that happens. So it's not a completely crazy comparison. Things like Section 8 are theoretically designed purely for charity purposes. They're just to help people. In the Cold War, this kind of aid we're talking about, it's to help these third world countries, but it's also to try to win them over and make them your friends. So there's this dual purpose to this kind of aid. So it's not a totally wacky comparison, but there's some differences. I think everyone gets the basic idea. It's a part of these Cold War strategies where the Soviet Union and the United States are trying to win over third world countries using various methods. Okay. Oh. Let me translate this for you. I forgot to put this in here. What does this mean in Russian or in English? The Committee for State Security. That's what KGB translates to. Komitet, committee, and then that other stuff, state security. All right. Any questions about this? I told you it would be brief.